We hope you are thrilled by these original Sherlock Holmes adventures. To help us continue creating them, please consider supporting our Patreon. As a thank you, patrons receive early access to most stories before they launch on YouTube. Your financial contributions are the lifeblood of this channel. The link to our Patreon is in the description below. It was in the latter days of April, in the year 1895, that the singular events which I am about to chronicle took place. The month had already been one of considerable exertion for my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, having culminated in the strange affair of Miss Violet Smith, the solitary cyclist of Charlington, and the subsequent unmasking of Mr. Woodley and his nefarious associates. I had, in my professional capacity as a medical man, advised Holmes to seek a period of repose. His iron constitution, though seemingly immune to the ordinary frailties of mankind, was nonetheless subject to the intense nervous exhaustion that invariably followed his more strenuous intellectual exercises. My advice, as was so often the case, fell upon deaf ears. To Sherlock Holmes, inaction was the true poison. On the damp, fog-wreathed morning of the 24th of April, I descended the 17 steps of our Baker Street lodgings to find him already pacing the sitting-room like a caged panther. The air was thick with the acrid fumes of the shag tobacco he favoured, and the breakfast on the sideboard lay entirely untouched. "The criminal classes have lost all enterprise, Watson," he groaned, casting a crumpled copy of the Daily Telegraph into the grate. "London has become a singularly uninteresting city. Not a single problem of any complexity presents itself. One is almost tempted to turn to politics for sheer want of intrigue. You have only just concluded a case of remarkable brutality," I observed, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Surely your mind requires some interval to recover its elasticity." "My mind, Watson, is akin to a racing engine, tearing itself to pieces because it is not connected up with the work for which it was built," Holmes replied, stopping before the window and gazing out at the dreary street. "I cannot exist without data. I cannot live without puzzles. Look at them out there, Watson. The merchants, the clerks, the artisans, all rushing to their mundane tasks, wholly devoid of the imagination that breeds true crime. Where is the Moriarty of today? Where is the subtlety, the grand design?" Before I could offer a soothing reply, a sharp knock at the door heralded the arrival of our page boy, Billy. He bore a silver tray upon which lay a single heavy card. Holmes snatched it up, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "Ah, perhaps I have spoken too hastily. This card, Watson, belongs to a man who dwells in the very highest echelons of modern commerce. John Vincent Harden," he read aloud, "Harden's Imperial Tobacco Company. Do you know the name?" "The tobacco millionaire?" I asked, my memory stirred. "I read an article regarding him in the Times only last week. He has practically monopolized the importation of Havana leaf into Europe." "Precisely," Holmes said, rubbing his long, thin hands together. "A man of immense wealth, considerable influence, and, judging by the heavy, irregular tread upon the stairs, currently labouring under a state of extreme agitation. We shall see, Watson, whether the wealth of the Indies can protect a man from the darker machinations of his fellow mortals." The door was flung open, and our visitor stumbled into the room. John Vincent Harden was a man who, under ordinary circumstances, would command immediate respect. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed the solid, authoritative bearing of a self-made industrialist. Yet the figure that stood before us was a ruin. His bespoke frock coat was wrinkled, his cravat askew, and his sparse iron-grey hair stood out in wild disarray. But it was his face that arrested my medical eye. It was the face of a man who had not slept in days, his skin a sallow, unhealthy parchment, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and darting rapidly about the room, as though he expected an ambush from the shadows. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, leaning heavily upon his gold-headed cane, "I entreat you, sir, tell me you are available. Money is no object. Name your fee, take half my fortune, but you must help me." Holmes gestured courteously toward the armchair beside the fire. "Pray compose yourself, Mr. Harden. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. You may speak as freely before him as you would before me. Billy, fetch Mr. Harden a glass of brandy." The millionaire collapsed into the chair, taking the brandy with a trembling hand and downing it in a single gulp. The fiery liquid seemed to restore a measure of his composure. He drew a deep, shuddering breath and looked at us with an expression of profound despair. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper, "I am going mad. That or I am the victim of a persecution so diabolical, so thoroughly unearthly, that I fear for my very soul." Holmes sat opposite him, pressing his fingertips together in his customary attitude of intense concentration. "I am a man of science, Mr. Harden. I deal in the tangible, the observable. I have no jurisdiction in the realm of ghosts. And until 3 weeks ago, I would have entirely agreed with you," cried Harden. "I am a practical man, Mr. Holmes. I built my empire on the docks of Havana and the warehouses of Virginia. I know the weight of a bale, the cost of a ship, the perfidy of competitors. I do not believe in spirits. And yet, the things I have seen, the things that have occurred in my own home—" He buried his face in his large, trembling hands. "Let us proceed systematically," Holmes said gently. "Where do you reside?" "At Highfield Manor, an estate I purchased 2 years ago in Kensington. It is a modern house built no more than 30 years ago. There are no ancient crypts, no tragic histories. It is a house of brick and mortar, equipped with the latest conveniences. And the occupants? Myself, my secretary Mr. Llewellyn, and a staff of 6. Or rather, there were 6. 5 have fled in terror within the last fortnight. Only my loyal butler Hodges remains, and he is a broken man. Even Llewellyn has taken rooms at a hotel, claiming his nerves can endure no more." "Pray tell us," I interjected, "what precisely are these manifestations that have so terrified your household?" Harden looked at me, a desperate plea for understanding in his bloodshot eyes. "It began with the grandfather clock in my study, a magnificent piece crafted by Tompion. 3 weeks ago I was working late, reviewing the quarterly ledgers. The hour was approaching midnight. I happened to glance up, and to my absolute horror the hands of the clock were turning. But they were turning backwards, Mr. Holmes. Slowly, deliberately, sweeping against the flow of time. I thought my eyes deceived me. I approached it, and I swear to you the brass pendulum was swinging, but the gears whirred in reverse, producing a sickening, unnatural grinding sound. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A mechanical fault, perhaps? A broken escapement? I brought in a master horologist the very next day. He dismantled the clock. He found nothing. He swore the mechanism was in perfect order, and that what I described was mechanically impossible without human intervention. Yet I was alone in the room. Harden paused, gripping the arms of his chair. That was merely the beginning. The following night, the furniture came alive. Alive? I echoed, unable to hide my skepticism. I mean precisely what I say, Dr. Watson. I was reading by the fire in the same study. I possess a heavy oak-framed reading chair, upholstered in leather, positioned near the centre of the room. As I sat there, a sudden, unnatural chill swept over the chamber. Then the chair began to move. "With you in it?" Holmes asked. "No, I was seated in the armchair by the hearth. The reading chair was empty. It shuddered violently, then began to drag itself across the Persian rug. There was no string, no wire, no trick of the light. It dragged itself a full 3 feet toward the door, emitting a terrible groaning sound as the wood strained. I leaped up, grasped the chair, and tried to pull it back. Mr. Holmes, it felt as though I was struggling against an invisible giant. It was rooted to the spot, humming with a bizarre vibration. Holmes leaned forward, his apathy entirely vanquished. "Humming, you say? A vibration?" "Yes." A slight tingling sensation passed into my hands when I touched the wood. It ceased after perhaps 10 seconds, and the chair became merely a chair once more. "Fascinating," murmured Holmes. "And the third manifestation?" Harden shuddered. "The most terrifying of all. For the past 3 nights I have locked myself in the study, determined to face whatever demon haunts me. I drew the heavy velvet curtains, lit the gas lamps, and waited. Shortly past 1 in the morning, the gas jets suddenly flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. Before I could strike a match, a faint, sickly green luminescence appeared on the glass of the window overlooking the garden. "A reflection?" I suggested. "A projection, Dr. Watson, but from where? It formed a shape. A grinning, spectral skull floating midway up the glass, and beneath it glowing letters formed words in thin air." "What were the words?" Holmes asked sharply. "Leave. Sign. Depart." That was all. They hovered there for nearly a minute, casting a ghastly light over the room before slowly dissolving. I threw open the window and looked out into the garden. There was nothing but the London fog. No tracks in the dew, no source of light, just the empty, silent grounds. Harden sank back, utterly exhausted by his narrative. "I have consulted doctors who told me my brain is overworked and prescribed bromide. I have consulted the police, who suspect a prank by disgruntled servants, but can find no proof. I'm at the end of my tether, Mr. Holmes. I cannot sleep. My business suffers. If this continues, I shall be bound for Bedlam." Holmes remained silent for a long minute, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and regular. When he finally spoke, his voice was crisp and businesslike. "You mentioned a business matter, Mr. Harden. You said, 'My business suffers.' To what extent?" Harden blinked, surprised by the pivot. "Tremendously. I am currently in the midst of negotiating a merger with the Virginia Leaf Cartel, a massive American syndicate. They wish to absorb my European distribution network. If they succeed, they will possess a total monopoly." "And are you inclined to sell?" I was not. Their initial offer was insulting, a mere fraction of what my company is worth. I rejected it outright a month ago. Since then, they have applied tremendous pressure. Rumours have been planted in the financial press regarding my financial stability. My shipping contracts have met with sudden, inexplicable delays. And now this madness. Who is the chief representative of this American syndicate in London? A man named Silas Vance. A ruthless, calculating individual. He operates out of an office in the city. "I see," Holmes said, rising to his feet. "Mr. Harden, I will take your case. I can assure you of one thing immediately. You are not going mad, nor are you the victim of a supernatural haunting. You are the victim of a remarkably ingenious, highly localized, and deeply malicious persecution." "But the ghosts—" "There are no ghosts, Mr. Harden. There is only physics, chemistry, and the boundless ingenuity of the criminal mind. Watson, if you would be so good as to consult the railway timetable, I believe a trip to Highfield Manor is in order. We shall examine this haunted study in the light of day." Highfield Manor proved to be a formidable structure of dark, Victorian red brick, set back from the road behind high iron gates. The grounds were expansive for London, featuring a sweeping drive and a dense copse of oak trees that shielded the property from the prying eyes of neighbours. The door was opened by Hodges, the butler. He was a frail-looking man whose pallor rivalled that of his master. He led us into a grand entrance hall, his eyes darting nervously toward the upper landing. "The study is on the first floor at the rear of the house, gentlemen," Harden explained as we ascended the sweeping staircase. "It overlooks the back gardens." We entered the room, and Holmes immediately set to work. It was a large, handsomely appointed chamber. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall sash windows. A massive mahogany desk stood at one end, and the famous Tompion grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. The centre of the room was dominated by a large Persian rug, upon which sat the oak reading chair Harden had described. Holmes began with the clock. He produced a magnifying glass and a small set of jeweller's tools from his pocket. He did not open the casing, but rather passed a small pocket compass slowly around the exterior of the mahogany cabinet. "Watch the needle, Watson," he instructed. I leaned in. As the compass passed the lower half of the clock, the needle suddenly swung violently to the left, quivering like a trapped insect. "Magnetism!" I exclaimed. "Indeed," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. "A localized magnetic field of considerable strength. The escapement of this clock, Mr. Harden, relies upon a delicate balance of brass and steel. A strong magnetic field, suddenly applied, would act upon the steel components, reversing the polarity of the movement and driving the gears backward. It is a trick that requires significant electrical current." He left the clock and moved to the heavy oak reading chair. He knelt beside it, running his long fingers over the floorboards beneath the Persian rug. Suddenly he threw back the rug, exposing the polished oak boards. "Ah!" he cried triumphantly. "Behold, Watson!" He pointed to a subtle anomaly. 4 small circular plugs of wood had been inserted into the floorboards, matching the distance between the 4 legs of the reading chair. Holmes drew his penknife and pried one of the plugs loose. Beneath it, gleaming dully in the light, was the flat head of a massive iron bolt. "And what of the chair?" Holmes asked, turning it over. He examined the bottom of the wooden legs. "Ingenious! The original brass casters have been removed. In their place, solid iron rods have been driven deep into the wood. Mr. Harden, does the room below this one belong to you?" "It is the billiard room," Harden replied, watching Holmes with growing astonishment. "We shall need to examine its ceiling shortly, but first the crowning glory of our ghostly pantomime." Holmes strode to the tall windows. He examined the glass closely, then opened the sash and leaned out, surveying the garden below. "The window glass is entirely ordinary," he noted. However, the angle— Watson, come here. I stood beside him and looked out. The garden swept down to a high brick wall, bordered by the dense copse of oak trees we had noticed upon arrival. "Do you observe the thickest of those oaks directly opposite this window?" Holmes asked, pointing with the stem of his pipe. "It stands perhaps 50 yards away." "I see it. Now, imagine a line drawn from the upper branch of that tree directly to this window pane. It creates a perfect optical corridor, unobscured by any other foliage. You suspect the projection originated from the tree?" "I am certain of it. The phenomena you described, Mr. Harden, the sudden darkness, the luminous skull, the floating words, these are the hallmarks of a phantasmagoria, an advanced stereopticon, or what the layman calls a magic lantern. However, to project a bright focused image across 50 yards through a London fog requires an immensely powerful light source, likely an electric arc lamp, and a lens of extraordinary quality. Such equipment is heavy, highly technical, and requires a dedicated power source." Harden looked bewildered. "But why? To what end?" "To break your mind, sir," I interjected, the horrifying realization dawning upon me. "They wish to drive you to a state of nervous collapse." "Precisely, Watson," Holmes agreed grimly. "Mr. Silas Vance, or whomever he has employed, is utilizing the cutting edge of modern science to wage a campaign of psychological warfare. If they can convince you and the medical establishment that you are losing your reason, you will be declared unfit to manage your affairs. The Virginia Leaf Cartel will then be able to purchase your empire from your conservators for a pittance." "The scoundrels!" Harden bellowed, the colour returning to his face in a rush of righteous anger. "I will have them arrested. I will call the police." "Patience, Mr. Harden," Holmes cautioned, holding up a hand. "We have theories and we have physical evidence of tampering, but we do not have the perpetrators. To go to the police now would merely send these scoundrels scurrying into the shadows, taking their ingenious apparatus with them. No, we must catch the ghosts in the act of haunting." "How do you propose we do that?" I asked. Holmes smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "By providing them with an audience. Tonight, Mr. Harden, you shall retire to a guest bedroom on the opposite side of the house. You will make a show of turning down the gas in this study at your usual hour. Watson and I, however, shall remain here, waiting in the dark. We shall see what manner of spirits the American cartel can summon." The hours of waiting were among the most nerve-wracking I have ever endured. Harden had followed Holmes's instructions to the letter. At 11 o'clock he extinguished the gaslight and departed, locking the study door loudly behind him. Holmes and I sat in 2 chairs, pushed flush against the wall, enveloped in pitch darkness. I had my service revolver resting upon my knee, though what use a bullet would be against an electromagnetic current I could not say. The house was tomb-like in its silence. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of the Tompion clock in the corner. Holmes sat beside me, utterly motionless, his breathing so shallow it was imperceptible. He was in his element, a hunter waiting by the watering hole. Midnight chimed. Then the single hollow stroke of 12:30. The spring chill seeped through the glass, gnawing at my bones. My grip on the revolver grew slick with sweat. Had they seen us? Were we waiting in vain? Then it began. It started not with a sight or a sound, but with a sensation. A low, subaudible vibration seemed to emanate from the very floorboards beneath our feet. It was a faint, electric hum that set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on my arms stand erect. Suddenly, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock faltered. It gave a sickening, metallic groan, like a living creature in pain. Then the sound resumed, but it was altered. Tick-tock became tock-tick. The gears were grinding in reverse. "The electromagnets in the ceiling below have been engaged," Holmes breathed into my ear, his voice a mere thread of sound. A moment later, a heavy scraping noise filled the room. Even though I knew the scientific cause, the hair on the nape of my neck prickled as the massive oak reading chair, faintly visible in the gloom, began to judder. With a terrible screech of wood against wood, it dragged itself across the Persian rug, pulled by the invisible magnetic attraction of the iron bolts beneath the floor. "And now for the grand finale," Holmes whispered. As if on cue, a brilliant, piercing beam of sickly green light lanced through the window. It struck the glass, expanding into a swirling cloud of luminescence. The light seemed to catch the dust motes in the air, creating a three-dimensional effect that was truly terrifying. Out of the green mist, the horrifying visage of a skull materialized, its empty sockets seeming to glare directly at the empty chair where Harden was supposed to be sitting. Beneath the skull, shimmering letters coalesced. "Madness comes. Sell. Surrender." "Beautifully executed," Holmes murmured in genuine admiration. A limelight projector fitted with a parabolic reflector and a painted slide. "Watson, the game is afoot." Holmes sprang from his chair, bounded across the room and threw open the window. The sudden movement disrupted the projection, the green beams scattering wildly across the ceiling. "They are in the oak tree, Watson! Come!" We tore from the study. Down the main staircase we plunged, bursting through the back door into the blinding damp fog. Holmes darted ahead, a greyhound on the scent, his flashlight a frantic yellow blade in the gloom. I sprinted blindly after him, boots slipping on wet grass, revolver gripped tight. As we neared the high brick wall, the beam of Holmes's light caught a chaotic scene amidst the branches of the largest oak. A wooden platform had been cleverly constructed, concealed by the thick spring foliage. Two men were desperately attempting to dismantle a large, brass-fitted apparatus that sat upon a heavy tripod. Below the tree, a massive array of galvanic batteries, thick cables snaking up the trunk, sat humming on the damp grass. "Police! Stay where you are!" Holmes bellowed, though we had no official authority. One of the men, a burly brute in a heavy reefer jacket, dropped a tangle of wires and leaped from the lower branches, making a dash for the brick wall. "Stop him, Watson!" Holmes cried. I levelled my revolver. "Halt, or I fire!" The man ignored the warning, scrambling up the ivy-covered bricks. I fired a warning shot over his head. The sharp crack of the pistol echoed like a cannon shot in the quiet neighbourhood. The man, startled, lost his footing and tumbled backward, landing heavily in the shrubbery. I was upon him in an instant, pressing the cold barrel of my weapon against his temple. "Do not move a muscle," I snarled. He groaned and went limp. Holmes, meanwhile, had swiftly climbed the lower branches of the oak and confronted the second man, a slight, bespectacled individual who was frantically trying to smash the glass lens of the projector. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Holmes said calmly, hauling the man down by the collar of his coat. "The destruction of evidence will only add to your sentence." He dragged the struggling man to the ground and shone his light upon his face. "Ah, Unless I am much mistaken, you are Mr. Henry Baskerville's old tutor. No, I joke, but you possess the definite physiognomy of an electrical engineer. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Sherlock Holmes. The man went deathly pale, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. Holmes, the devil! No, merely a consultant, Holmes replied cheerfully. Watson, I trust your prisoner is secure? Excellent. Let us examine this infernal machinery. Holmes turned his light upon the base of the tree. The setup was a marvel of illicit engineering. 3 massive lead-acid batteries of the type used to power early electric carriages were wired in series. Thick copper cables ran from the batteries across the lawn, burying themselves beneath the soil and disappearing toward the foundation of the house, undoubtedly leading to the billiard room beneath the study where the electromagnets were housed. A separate cable ran up the tree to power the electric arc lamp within the projector. The projector itself was a masterpiece, fitted with a finely ground telescopic lens capable of focusing an image over a long distance. "Magnificent!" Holmes murmured, examining the painted slide that remained in the projector's slot. "The skull is quite artistic, but the motive is entirely base. Who employs you? Is it Silas Vance?" The bespectacled man remained stubbornly silent. "It matters not," Holmes said with a dismissive wave. "The Metropolitan Police have remarkably persuasive methods for extracting such information, particularly when faced with charges of extortion, breaking and entering, and conspiracy." The sound of heavy boots and blowing whistles indicated that my gunshot had finally roused the local constabulary. Within minutes the garden was swarming with police. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, who had been summoned by a telegram Holmes had quietly dispatched earlier that afternoon, came striding through the fog. "So, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade said, looking at the prisoners and the bizarre machinery, "you've caught the ghosts of Highfield Manor, have you?" "I have caught the mechanics, Lestrade," Holmes corrected. "The true ghost, the man who funded this elaborate theatrical production, is currently sleeping soundly in his bed, dreaming of a monopoly on Virginia tobacco. I suggest you pay a call upon Mr. Silas Vance of the American cartel. You will find that these men are on his payroll." The following afternoon found us back in the familiar, comforting surroundings of 221B Baker Street. The fog had lifted, and the pale spring sun filtered through the window, illuminating the swirling clouds of blue smoke from Holmes's pipe. John Vincent Harden sat in the armchair opposite us, looking like a man who had shed a burden of £1,000. He had slept for 14 hours straight and appeared 10 years younger. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes," he said, producing a remarkably thick envelope from his breast pocket and placing it upon the table. "You have saved my sanity, my business and my fortune. Vance was arrested this morning at his hotel, utterly ruined. I took great pleasure in sending a telegram to the Virginia Leaf Cartel, informing them their offer was permanently declined. The engineer, a man named Prendergast, confessed to the entire plot in exchange for leniency. Vance paid him an exorbitant sum to devise a method of driving me mad without leaving physical evidence in the study. It was a clever scheme, Holmes mused, leaning back and blowing a long smoke ring toward the ceiling. They gained access to the house by bribing one of the servants, who subsequently fled, likely the footman who departed just before the haunting began. Under the pretense of re-varnishing the floorboards, he replaced the brass casters of your chair with iron, and planted the iron bolts beneath the rug. By controlling the current from the garden, he could switch the magnetic field on and off at will, dragging the chair and reversing the clock's escapement. "And the phantom skull?" I asked. "A simple application of optics, Watson. The arc lamp projector, hidden in the oak tree, cast its beam through the window. The sudden darkness in the study, which terrified Mr. Harden so, was achieved by a secondary magnetic relay that pinched the gas line to the room's fixtures. A remarkably dangerous ploy, I might add, as it left the jet open, slowly filling your closed study with highly combustible and toxic gas. Once the room was dark, the projection was highly visible on the glass." "It is terrifying," Harden said softly, "to think that the great scientific advancements of our age, electricity, magnetism, optics, can be so easily perverted to the cause of criminal greed." "That, Mr. Harden, is the tragedy of human nature," Holmes replied quietly. "Science is a neutral tool. It is the mind that wields it that determines its morality. As long as there is immense wealth to be gained, there will be men like Vance who will use any means, however brilliant or diabolical, to seize it. It is our task, Watson, to ensure that the science of deduction keeps pace with the science of crime." Harden stood, shook our hands with profound gratitude, and departed, leaving the thick envelope behind. Holmes glanced at the envelope, then pushed it toward me. "Lock that away in the dispatch box, Watson. It will serve to replenish our supplies of chemical reagents." "And now," he said, rising and reaching for his violin case, "I believe the afternoon calls for something lighter. What do you say to a little Mendelssohn to cleanse the palate of the American tobacco trade?" As the first sweet soaring notes of the violin filled the sitting room, I looked out at the bustling street below. The ordinary world of London had returned, but I knew that beneath its mundane surface the dark currents of human greed and ingenuity continued to flow, waiting only for a mind as sharp as Sherlock Holmes's to drag them into the light. Thanks for joining me for another original mystery. Do not forget to check out our Patreon down below to support the channel.